Well, welcome everyone to the Canadian Cochrane Network and Center's webinar room for the Fall 2009 Research Series. My name is Adrienne Stevens, and I'm the Center's Education Coordinator. I just want to welcome all of you here today. We are pleased that you can be here. We have folks from coast to coast in Canada, across the United States, and from locations worldwide joining us for today's session. Thank you for your continued participation in and support for our research webinar series. Before we get started, I do want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the funders of the Canadian Cochrane Network and Centre, those being the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and 6 of their research institutes, as well as to the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies and Health, to these folks for their sponsorship during this current funding period. As well, I'd like to thank the Pan American Health Organization, that is the regional office for the WHO, to their Research Promotion and Development Division, providing Illuminate Live to us for using in our webinar series. PAHO is a valued partner of the Canadian Cochrane Network and Centre. Newly released is the CCNC Winter Webinar Series, and as you can see on the screen, the topics that are upcoming for January, February, and March. So we will have a session hosted by the Cochrane Health Equity Field in January, and 2 follow-up sessions to today's webinar, those being more about grade from Holger Schönemann, as well as a follow-up webinar by Nancy Santesso, today's featured speaker. If you've not received your invite for this, you are more than welcome to contact us at ccnc-iph@uottawa.ca, and we will be happy to forward a registration form. Great. So without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce Nancy Santesso. She is a registered dietitian as well as has a Master of Library and Information Science. She is presently in Hamilton, Canada at McMaster University working with Dr. Holger Schönemann. She is a member of the Applicability and Recommendations Methods Group of the Cochrane Collaboration and provides support to folks who are creating summary of findings tables for Cochrane systematic reviews. She has also been involved in the development of guidelines for the WHO and other professional organizations using the GRADE approach. Nancy is also an editor of the Cochrane Consumer and Communications Review Group and is working to develop a format for to standardize the plain language summaries and Cochrane reviews. And I've had the pleasure of working with Nancy, and she is a valued colleague of myself. So without further ado, why don't you join me in welcoming Nancy to the floor.
Great, thanks Adrienne, and again welcome to everybody to this session. As Adrienne explained, this session is the first of 3 sessions for summary findings tables and grade. And during this first session, what I wanted to do is, again, provide an introduction, but really put grade into context, how grade is being used in systematic reviews, how they're being used, and how we can produce summary of findings tables. And I'll touch a bit, if we do have time, on the software that we use to create a summary of findings tables, the Grade Pro. And hopefully I'll really be able to get you started on thinking about grade and summary findings tables for your systematic reviews. And what I thought we could do is, what I'll try and do is stop every 15 or 20 minutes or so to ask everyone if they have some questions, just so you don't forget. And also we welcome you to send to us any questions that you have using the chat box on the left-hand side. And what will happen is Adrienne will just keep track of those questions, and when we do pause, we can make sure to address any of those questions. And hopefully we'll have a bit of a live interaction part and a little bit of live action. That should be interesting. Okay. Basically, probably a lot of you have seen and heard that summary findings tables are being encouraged in the in your Cochrane systematic reviews. At least one should be provided in each review. And I just wanted to make sure that we stepped back from just going through an exercise of creating a table. and which this can be, tends to happen that everyone just seems to focus on creating this table or creating a risk of bias table and not relating it back to the actual systematic review. So hopefully in the next few slides I'll convince you that it's not just an exercise. First, putting grade into context. If you've ever read any articles from the BMJ or anything about grade, you'll have seen that grade is actually part of a larger process. And for example, grade is being used to fit into creating guidelines and making sure that guidelines are evidence-based. And basically what we are seeing is that the grade process, as identified by the WHO, is that basically we're starting out with creating and identifying what our questions are, and then based on those questions creating systematic reviews. And obviously this is where we find Cochrane fitting in, is preparing those systematic reviews. While at the end, you'll notice that this only goes up to the analysis part. Once you have done your analysis, the grade process sort of comes into play, where we're actually identifying what is the level of evidence for the results that we found. And once we have that evidence per outcome, we need to prepare some sort of table so that we can present the evidence to the members on a guideline panel who are making the decisions. And that's part of the process of grade as well, as creating the tables, specifically in systematic review, summary of findings tables. Once they have the table, they're starting to consider the evidence and make the recommendations. And grade also goes further into a process of how to create recommendations by considering the evidence, weighing the benefits and the harms, et cetera, et cetera. So grade also fits in the later steps of the guideline development process, but of course we'll just focus on the systematic review process. Basically, also taking a step back to consider the Cochrane systematic review process. Cochrane is obviously promoted as being a review process that is very systematic and transparent. And if you're looking at the Cochrane Handbook, there's quite a known process, and always identified with Cochrane systematic reviews, always around developing your clinical question, the PICO process, inclusion-exclusion criteria, definitely processes of how to do a systematic search, even processes for how to make the forms and the systematic way of making those forms to extract the data. Definitely a priori methods about the analysis, but for a long time there hasn't been systematic methods for the interpretation of the results and even the presentation of the results. And what I did, which I thought was quite interesting, is I went back into the old Cochrane handbooks in 2002, and this was quite interesting to me, was that before, in the interpreting your results section of the handbook, there was really this paragraph here about all the different approaches that are available for grading the strength of the evidence, and that Cochrane was actually not promoting a certain approach, and hopefully developing an approach in the future to be able to come up with a more systematic way of coming up with conclusions. But in the meantime, at that point, it was open to the individual reviewer. But now there is a more systematic approach, and that approach can be found in the Cochrane Handbook. And members of the Applicability and Recommendations group helped to create the chapters in the handbook, chapters 11 and 12 specifically, about presenting the results and interpreting the results. So anything that I'll be saying in the next hour or so refers specifically back to those chapters in the handbook, and of course also available on the web. The whole idea behind these chapters is identifying the difference between the magnitude of the effect and the quality of the evidence behind that magnitude of effect or result. And many of you may have seen this figure before, but it just emphasizes very clearly and indicates very clearly this difference between magnitude and quality. And if you've read the quote underneath the figure, it says, it's two meteorologists, and one says, I figure there's a 40% chance of showers and a 10% chance that we know what we're talking about. And this is specifically related, again, to what's happening in our Cochrane reviews. We're coming up with a result, usually from a meta-analysis or a narrative synthesis, etc. And now we want to find out how confident we are in those actual results, and that relates to the quality of the evidence. And just to really clearly illustrate this, we've done a couple times in the workshops that we've done in person is a small exercise in getting people to really think about what are the issues that are coming up and what are the things that you need to consider when you're considering what the quality of the evidence is. So before I describe this example, I just want to warn everybody that in the next 5 minutes I'll be asking you to send some feedback into what your thoughts are. So you may want to really pay attention at this point. So right now I'm giving an example of a systematic review that a couple of people in our group have completed. And it's a systematic review about whether heparin or blood thinners actually prolong the survival of patients with cancer. And basically it's a systematic review. They went through the PICO. Patients with cancer, it was on an outpatient basis. They were provided with heparin or they were provided with the usual care, so usually no heparin. And in the studies, they wanted to find out, did it prolong survival, but they also looked at whether it increases major bleeding, which is a major side effect of heparin. So what happened they did the systematic search, they did their analysis, and they came up with the results for major bleeding. And this is the forest plot that was produced for major bleeding. And at this point, I'll ask Adrian to, we'll open up the chat, the messages that people can send to everyone so that it can just, anyone can send a message and everyone else can see them. And what I'll ask, so Adrian's just letting us know. So what I'll ask is, once you're find this result, and considering your own systematic review that you would be doing, what are the types of things that you'd be thinking about that would increase or lower your confidence in this result? So what would make you doubt whether this result was actually the true result? So we came up that it actually increases your risk by 1.5 times. So the risk ratio is 1.5. So basically, just to start it off, when I'm looking at this, I would consider, okay, well, I just had 3 studies that came up with this result. How good is that? So if anyone can enter in at the side in the chat part, you can just type in that white box and then press send. For example, we have a couple people who have started to add in. That's exactly the types of things that we're thinking about. Also, another thing to think about would be some issues around our patients. Any other information that you would want to know about the PICO. Okay, I think that's pretty good. A lot of you have touched on a lot of the issues that come up. Yep. And keep adding any if you think of any more while I'm speaking. But basically, there's a lot of criteria that were brought up about the, and I'll just point to them here. A lot of criteria brought up about the number of events. So 6 events. Also the number of participants, there was 406 or 408. I had indicated the number of studies that were provided. Someone also mentioned the confidence intervals and how precise that estimate was, going from 0.26 to 8. So even our diamond at the bottom, going over the null effect of 1. Some other issues that were brought up was the variation in cancer. This one just spoke about cancer, so there was a lot of issues about the heterogeneity of the disease of cancer. I think some other ones were just alone, the homogeneity in the patients as well. So what we usually do in workshops is, and this is exactly what happens each time, and this is exactly what happened in this case, was that everybody has a lot of these, knows that these are the types of criteria that you're looking at for the quality of the evidence, but a lot of times they're not being looked at in a systematic way in Cochrane reviews, and that was the issue. And this is why we've really gone forward and produced an approach, a grade system, to looking at the factors that come into play when you're considering the quality of the evidence. So for example, in grade, picking up from all of the comments that you had identified, the main determinants of quality were divided out into 5 main criteria that principally come into effect when we're looking at systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials. And basically we're looking at the study limitations, heterogeneity, the indirectness, so the applicability or the heterogeneity of the disease or patients, the imprecision, and the publication bias. And again, this is all from, for information found in Chapter 12. What I'll do is I'll just spend a little bit of time going through each of these, but I don't want to spend too much time because the next session, we have the session in February in which we'll be, there'll be a lot more discussion of each of these criteria and specifically how you would grade a systematic review. Limitations in study designs. Obviously we want to know what kind of bias is happening in the studies. Is there a high risk of bias or a low risk of bias in the studies that were included in your meta-analysis or your narrative synthesis? And does that bias actually affect how confident you are in those results? And if you have had a look at the handbook, and you may have some experience, we're asking people to use the risk of bias, the results of your risk of bias that you do, and the risk of bias tables. And for our question, I just came up with, we have our risk of bias. Our risk of bias table and the criteria within the risk of bias that you're considering. So again, you're looking at allocation concealment, blinding was brought up by another participant, sequence generation, the incompleteness of the outcome data, freeze from selective reporting, and all other biases, as well as stopping trials too early. In our example, the blood thinners for prolonging survival, there were actually 5 studies in the whole review, and only 3 looked at major bleeding, which is quite unusual since heparin obviously is an important side effect, is bleeding. And so what we did, and you can tell by the risk of bias table just under the free of selective reporting, 2 of the studies may have had selective reporting and didn't contribute to the results. So we may not be too confident that this is actually the result. And this is what we actually saw. We only had 3 of the studies. The next criteria considered in the grade approach is heterogeneity. And this is heterogeneity of the actual results. And there's quite a lot of information in the handbook about heterogeneity, a lot of work going on in the methods groups about heterogeneity. So I won't spend too much time, but heterogeneity factors in when the heterogeneity is high and it cannot be explained. So you've done some subgroup analysis and it still cannot be explained. You want to present the result that you found still, but you're really not too sure or confident about it because the heterogeneity is too high and we couldn't explain it. In our case, in the blood thinners example, the heterogeneity, we can just eyeball it and it looks like there's some overlap with the confidence intervals just from the diagram, or we can use the statistical methods from the chi-squares and the I-squares, etc. And in this case, we thought that the heterogeneity wasn't so high that it would actually lower our confidence. Indirectness is another criteria in the grade approach. So you should be considering, again, how generalizable or applicable these results would be to the question that you had asked. In our case, we had asked about prolonging survival in any type of cancer. If, for example, we had done our meta-analysis and it turned out that all of the studies that were included in our meta-analysis all were in cases of advanced cancer, then we might not be able to generalize that result to other cancers that were not in different levels or were not as advanced. In our case, we did have a broad range of cancers in the 3 that we did have, mind you, and we didn't feel that that was a reason to lower our confidence. The next criteria was imprecision. And imprecision is basically around the confidence intervals and the number of participants and events. So in our case, the blood thinners, you can just see by the diamond and also by the numerical result that the confidence interval is somewhat wide, yes. It does include the possibility, yes, that it would increase. The actual point estimate is an increase in major bleeding. It also spans over the possibility that there's no increase in major bleeding. So it could be considered a wide interval. But however, other factors considered, the major bleeding is a side effect found in other studies, not necessarily just in cancer studies, that it increases with heparin use. And so you might want to consider those factors as well when you're considering imprecision. In our case, we didn't necessarily think that this imprecision would really decrease the result of a 1.5 increase. However, it is a non-significant result. Publication bias, again, a lot of information in the handbook about publication bias. Just basically the idea is that negative studies that are not published are not included in the meta-analysis, and whether those negative studies would actually change the result if they were included in the meta-analysis. A lot of times this is done by creating a funnel plot. At the top here I have a funnel plot, and this is a really good illustration because there's enough studies to get a true picture of what's going on. The line of no differences here, this was the point estimate that we found. If we were to add in a whole bunch of other studies on this side, that is the negative studies, you might find that the result actually moves closer or over to a line of no difference. So that, in that case, you might doubt whether there's that this result is the true effect, and perhaps that publication bias may be an issue, and it may lower our confidence in the result. In our case, going back to our example of blood thinners, we only had 3 studies, and generally you don't want to do a forest plot with that many studies. But probably right now we don't have a bias because we really don't have an idea of whether there's positive or negative studies being published. So we didn't we didn't think that publication bias would actually decrease our confidence in the results. Pulling it together, once you've gone through all of those issues for each of your outcomes, how do you come up with a bottom line? So the GRADE approach uses the words that it goes from a high quality of evidence to a very low quality of evidence. So your randomized control studies start out with high, but as you start to find serious reasons to start doubting the confidence and the actual true effect that you found in your meta-analysis or your narrative synthesis, then you would start decreasing and going down that slope to moderate or low or very low quality evidence. And this type of information, all of the things that you considered in the GRADE approach, all of the criteria, what you came up with for your bottom line, that's the type of information that you need to include in your results or discussion sections. It's not just, this was the result we found, but what do you think about that result? Are you confident in that actual result? And again, in our case, we actually had a quote about, there was a low likelihood of publication bias for major bleeding. This was, the non-significant result with the wide confidence intervals was likely due to the number of participants or the number of events. And I just might stop here to see if we have any questions right now, because after this I'll move into the summary of findings tables and how it all fits together. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or just send a message through the chat, and that'll reach any of us. Looks good. Okay. So what I'll do, I think we're okay. I'll just continue then. So basically, it's remembering that the GRADE process is what's happening while you're moving through your results to making your conclusions. And regardless if you even went and decided whether you were going to do a summary of findings table, you would be including that information in your systematic review. So the systematic approach of going through and evaluating the quality of the evidence. However, wouldn't it be great if you could summarize all of that information, all of the issues about quality of evidence in a nice table? And we know that people like tables. They summarize the information, and basically we're using these tables and some modifications of these tables to present to guideline members, so members on a panel to make decisions about whether they offer blood thinners or they recommend that people are offered blood thinners, or in this example, in this summary findings table, whether you would offer self-management programs to patients, whether patients benefit, whether they would waste their time taking a self-management program, or whether the government would fund such programs for patients. So what I'll do is I'll spend a bit of time on the summary of findings table, and many of you have probably seen a summary of findings table before. First, I'd just like to apologize, it's a bit blurry, but I think we have the general idea from this slide, that the summary of findings table is really divided out and for one comparison. So if you're doing a systematic review that includes multiple comparisons, so for example, this summary of findings table is for one comparison, which is self-management versus just usual care. And you can just see that at the front. So at the top, self-management versus usual care. If in the review that you also included self-management compared to just providing patients with a pamphlet, that's another comparison, and you would create another summary of findings table for that comparison. So just one comparison per summary of findings table. And then what's important is that when including the information about the self-management, you're including all of the outcomes that someone who was making a decision about whether to offer self-management programs, to fund them, to take a self-management program, all of the outcomes that they would consider in making their decision. So in this case, we've included quality of life, symptoms in the, from the score, how many times they might go to hospital or go to the emergency or to visit their doctor. So those are the types of outcomes that are important. And those outcomes all relate back to the self-management effect of the self-management program. And I know I'm emphasizing this, but what's happening, and we've seen in a couple of tables, is that Cochrane reviews are not always set up, especially in Revman, as just comparison and outcomes. Oftentimes you'll just have outcome, 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 outcome. And what's happened is people have actually created summary of findings tables all on one outcome. And it's very interesting because what you'll have is a summary of findings table with say self-management for patients, and the outcome will be pain, measured by dichotomous measures. Then there'll be pain measured by continuous measures. Then there might be pain in a subgroup, and there might be pain when there was just studies for that included allocation concealment. And they'll have 5 or 6 rows of pain in all the different ways that it was measured and subgrouped and etc. And that's not what you want to see in a summary of findings table. You want to see pain, you want to see maybe function, adverse events, side effects, etc. And all of those would relate back to the one comparison. And so outcomes are found along the side, and for each outcome, there's a specific row going through the entire results and the quality of the evidence. And say, for example, if I was to take respiratory-related hospital admissions. There was, going across the table, we see that there were almost 1,000 patients. There were 8 studies to make this result. The results were actually that they came up with an odds ratio of 0.64. And what the summary findings table also does is converts that into numbers that are useful to decision makers. So they take that odds ratio of 0.64, but also explains that Okay, what actually happens in a group? So in a group of people who don't attend the self-management program, about 10 out of 100 would actually go to the hospital in a 1-year period. So 10 out of 100 would go. But for the people who actually take the self-management program, there would be 10 times the odds ratio, so the risk goes down. So the risk goes down by 0.64%, let's just say. And so basically with some other calculations, you're just timesing the odds ratio by the 10 and coming up that there are basically 7 people who would be admitted to the hospital if they took the self-management program. And these kind of numbers are all shown in Grade Pro, and hopefully we'll get to that. The other important factor is that, yes, we came up with an odds ratio of 0.64, but this isn't actually, we have some doubt about whether this is really the true effect. And we may need more research to get a better estimate and a truer estimate of what's actually happening. So again, according to the grade criteria, there was moderate level of evidence. And as with anything that we do in Cochrane, we need to be transparent. And so we've provided an area in the summary of findings table to say how we came up with these numbers, why we've chosen certain numbers, and how we came up with the quality of evidence. So to clarify, indicate what our judgments are, and to make sure that it's a transparent process. Now, I'd like to move into just going into the software that's being used to create the summary of findings table. So once you've gone into your review, you've created your results, you've considered the factors for grade, and you're at the step point where you want to start creating the summary findings table. And before I go on, I just want to make sure if there were any questions at this point before I go on. And I guess, Adrian, will it be open? And anyone can raise their hand or just send a message through the chat section at the bottom. Now I'm wondering, okay. We do have a question, and I guess what I can do is from Nathan. And he asked about the number or limits on the number of summary findings tables per review. And basically, there is no limit. Only one main comparison or main summary findings table is shown at the front of the review, and then the other summary findings tables will be at the end of the review with the other tables. So basically, and this is a good question, basically you'll want to focus on the most important comparison or intervention that you're testing and put that in the main comparison. And basically, yep, you can create as many summary findings as you want. We're really strongly encouraging that you would include at least one per review. And okay, so what I'll do is, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in. But what I will do is I'll proceed on to the software that we have. And I'll just stop. Nathan has asked another question. What is the typical number of summary findings tables in a review that have already been published? Basically, people are just striving to at least do one. And I think a lot of the times this is just because that most systematic reviews will cover one intervention and one main comparison. So oftentimes you'll only have one summary findings table that you'll need to produce anyway. Okay, and I'll just ask Adrian. I wanted to visit the website where Grade Pro is. And I think Adrian will link to that website in just a second. And basically what it is, what we're going to bring up is the website on the IMS Cochrane website that holds Grade Pro, and is a place where you can download Grade Pro. The website is continually being developed and added to because we realize that we need quite a few resources, and people are looking for resources about Grade Pro and summary findings tables. And we'll just wait for that to load up. And And basically you can reach this website through a couple of ways. You can go to the Cochrane.org website in general, and it'll be under the resources. Okay, we're just waiting for that to come up. And it's under resources, and you could link to Revman or GradePro. It's all on the same website. What we've included, the program should be downloadable for, it's made specifically for the Windows software. We are working on a Apple or Mac software version for you. However, it's not yet in place, so it is a Windows software. Adrian, are we having difficulty just reaching the website right now, or? Yes, okay, so we are. So what I can do is wait to visit that website. Can we? Yeah, okay, great. We'll do that at the end if it's available. So right now I'll just move ahead with, on the website for GradePro, there's a specific section just right on the front page of GradePro on the internet page is a link, and it says Getting Started. And there you'll find what I have in front of me right now is a basic task list of how to get started to making your summary of findings table. And I think this is really valuable, especially for new users. It'll take you, right from the beginning of starting with downloading GradePro and importing, exporting, and we'll go through some of those steps today. But it really clearly lays everything out, and people do find it quite useful. This can also be found in the help section of the GradePro software as well, and I'll show you that in a bit as well. So the GradePro profiler, after you've downloaded it to your desk, and what I won't do is I won't do a live presentation because we'll spend a bit more time doing a live hands-on working session in the March webinar. For now, I just wanted to show you some of the basics just to get started. If you're interested in fooling around with it, or you wanted to start one of your summary findings table for your systematic review. Basically, before you start the GradePro and start importing work from Revman, you want to make sure that you have your results in your meta-analysis, etc., and everything done up to that point. Because once you import it into GradePro, anything you change in Revman will not automatically, and obviously not change in GradePro software because it is separate. So basically, GradePro, or the Grade Profiler, works with Revman files, so you can directly import any of your Revman files into GradePro. And when opening it, it's a typical software. It will be ask you to make a new profile. You'll simply enter in and save a new profile for whatever systematic review you're doing. So basically, we just typed in heparin as our grade profile. And once you enter in, it's an empty file. And the first thing that you will do is import your data from the Revman file. So under File, Importing, and you would choose a Revman file. And basically, you're just choosing the Revman file that you have saved or are using in your Revman currently, most recent version. In this case, I found the heparin example with the in cancer. I press it, I choose that and open it, and basically I've imported into the GradePro software. So what GradePro does, it takes all of the numerical information and it pulls from Revman all of your comparisons and all of the outcomes from your Revman file. So it's in those numbers. If you didn't have a meta-analysis or an entry for one of your outcomes, nothing is imported from that. So that key to just remember later. You would have to create new outcomes for that, and we'll show you a bit later. The first thing that you'll see is that you've gone in and it pulled up my one comparison that I had, and you can see that. Maybe I'll just point at this way. Maybe I'll use the other direction. There. It pulled in the comparison for the parenteral anticoagulation, so the blood thinners example. And basically, this whole front side, the right-hand side of the software, is similar to Revman. You work on the right-hand side, and then you have your comparisons and everything down the left-hand side. And this section is where you will be entering the data for the top part of the summary of findings table, so the PICO, etc. This again is pulled in from the Revman file, but often doesn't come in exactly perfectly. So you may need to go in and edit, the wording for your interventions and your comparisons, etc. Once you've done that and you've started to create the top bar of the summary of findings table, you'll need to start working on the outcomes. And before I do that, I just want to make sure and point out this help section. Everything about grade, a lot of the parts of the Cochrane Handbook, a lot of questions that you might have are answered in the help section. If you just click on the help section, this is what comes up. And what I've done is I've just expanded the information under the folder for creating summary findings tables. So it goes through the whole beginning of managing your outcomes, creating outcomes, importing. If you click on that, you'll see that there's the getting started. That's the list. So again, the task list is underneath there. And then it goes through about how to evaluate the quality of the evidence. So it goes through all of the grade criteria, including some others. And then it goes through how those numbers were created. So the 10 out of 100 or the 7 per 100 as well. And it goes through the differences between dichotomous and continuous outcomes. So there's quite a bit of information in that help section. Next, you'll just go into your outcomes next. And basically what you can do is you just expand it, and what we'll show are all the outcomes that you had. So all the meta-analysis that you had, all the results that you had from your review are imported in. So in this case, and as I said before, there's quite a few results for mortality. And you don't want all of those results for mortality. You'll need to decide on which mortality you're going to present that decision makers need to know about. Choose one, and then, if you need to, put some comments in a comments part or in the footnotes. But again, you're not going to be presenting all of these results for all of these different subgroups analyses or sensitivity analysis for mortality. You can see that the outcome actually came out. You can visualize the outcome at the bottom, so it's already starting to create the summary of findings table here. And what happens for each outcome is there's two main screens. This screen, and you may notice, is all about the grading criteria. And there's another screen, which we'll go to in a minute, which is all about the numbers, so the summary of the findings. And I'll just spend a couple of minutes on this screen because GradePro is set up to help you move through going through your grade and grading the quality of the evidence. So moving through each of the criteria. For example, in our case, we had some problems with the limitations. So we entered in that there were some serious limitations. And you'll always be prompted to indicate a footnote whenever you downgrade or whenever you find that there's a problem with one of the criteria. And I just filled in the rest of them. And basically, I just opened that up to just see that you'll be given a choice. So for publication bias, you'll be given a choice. Was publication bias likely or unlikely? And is it going to be a problem when considering the confidence that you have in those results? Once you've entered in all of these criteria, what will happen is that, and you may not have noticed it from each screen, that now you actually have, from what you entered, a bottom line quality of evidence. In this case, we had some serious problems with limitations in the design. If you'll recall, that was the selective reporting. And here's the footnote that I mentioned about that. So selective reporting was likely, and that it's now come up as moderate quality of evidence. And that will be shown in the summary of findings table. Next, you want to work on the quality summary of findings. And this goes through all of the numbers. Now you'll notice that some of these numbers were imported, so came in directly from the Revman analysis, the forest plots. But again, it's not always in the perfect format, and you may want to emphasize different things, etc. So there's a bit more information that you can start entering into this part here, and more details on that in a later session. You will probably have noticed that the only outcomes that were entered were major bleeding, minor bleeding, and DVT, and the mortality. We added in another outcome that is important, that we didn't find any studies that reported it, so we had to enter in a new outcome. And we've eliminated all of those mortality outcomes as well to create just 5 outcomes for our summary of findings table. We always recommend that you preview your table after you've filled in all of the criteria and the numbers. And there's the icon at the top there, and you'll be able to view it. It's just a really good idea to have a quick look before you actually say, okay, this is the end, this is my table that I would like to feature in my systematic review. So next what I'll do is, once you have your table and you're happy with it, you can export it and import it directly into the Revman file. Basically it's quite easy. You're moving from File, Export As, and you're exporting it as a Review Manager Summary of Findings table. And you'll simply save it wherever you like. And then you're at the point where you're going to be importing your table. So back in the Revman file, it's underneath Tables, and there's a line for Summary of Findings tables. If you just go over to the side, you can click that and add your Summary of Findings table. And what happens is that you're actually brought through to a wizard. So yes, I would like to import. And it goes through a couple of steps asking you, what are you importing, where is it, find it, are you sure, etc., etc. And basically, you find your summary findings table file, so it's usually a .sos, so easy to remember and hopefully easy to find, and just import that. And that will just go automatically into your Revman file. So quite painless to import. We haven't really had any problems with the importing methods. And so basically your table is in there and you're ready to go. Any questions for that part at all? I know it was a bit quick, but I thought it was just a good introduction to the software. So we have a question from Nathan. Can an existing summary of findings table be imported into the grade profiler for updating? No, unfortunately not. So, which is a good point to ask. What I didn't show is actually that you are, once you create the grade profile, you are saving your file in Grade Pro. So you would just open that file and use that to update. So you would have to have the actual Grade Pro file. Another question that we had was, can Revman or Mac import the Grade Profile file? No. So the only software program, I think, is, if I understand the question properly, the only thing that can open a Grade Profile file, the Grade Pro profile, like the Grade Pro file, can only be opened by Grade Pro. The Summary of Findings table can actually be opened by Revman, and it can be opened in Notepad, etc., as an HTML. If you want to and I'll answer the next question. If you want, I'll see if I can show it here. If you want, you can actually use your summary of findings table and export it as a Word document, an HTML file, and an image. So what we've had is that people who are submitting reviews to non-Cochrane journals are simply downloading it as a Word document and using it as a table that they would submit to a journal. The other question was using Revenant from if you create a summary of findings table, regardless of what, if you have a Revman software on Mac, there should be no problems importing the summary of findings because it's the actual file, the .sof, that you're importing. So that file can be imported into any Revman interface that you're working on. I hope that answered the question. Any other questions before we? So what I'll do is I think wrap up at this point. I'm not sure, Adrian, were we able to access the website? Because I could just show that quickly. Oh, here we are. In the meantime, if you need any more information about Grade Pro, again, or anything about Grade, etc., there is a support that is provided. So you can contact me directly. Just a second. I'm just going to hand it over to Adrian.
Hi all, I'm sorry for the delay with loading Grade Pro on the website. I am trying to access through Cochrane.org, and in fact yesterday when I was on Cochrane.org I noticed that there were some issues with the website and some folks weren't even able to access. And so that could be the problem today. I'm just going to try it one more time. If not, what I will do is I will put it into the chat room for you, and then you can access it at the end of today's session and bookmark it as well on your web browser. I'm just going to try one more time. It looks like it's trying to load but not accessing it fully. So I think at this point what I'll do is I will close it down. I will hand the microphone over to Nancy, and I will add the information into the chat room for you to access at a later point. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to have a successful connection today.
Okay, so just to wrap up, there is more help available. So again, in the Cochrane Handbook in chapters 11 and 12, there's the help that I showed you in the Grade Pro software, which is quite extensive. There's also other resources on the website, so the ims.cochrane website. So there's other presentations that we've done that are featured there. You can always contact me, and I just apologize for the spelling of McMaster.ca. So there's an S in there. Sorry about that. We can make sure to repair that. Or contacting directly support@gradepro.org, which comes to me and a few other people as well. We are currently working on some online modules, which we will be posting soon, which will go through all of the different factors in grade, all of the criteria individually, and also some introductions and specifics about another online tutorial for Grade Pro. And just reminding you that there are the future webinars, so if you need more information, we will be able to feature those extra webinars and hopefully provide even more information to you. So more details about grade and how to grade the evidence in February, and more about how to use Grade Pro on a hands-on demonstration in March. If there aren't any other questions, I'll hand the mic back over to Adrian. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, and I agree. Thank you, Nancy, for the session. I'm agreeing with the other applause that's going through the chat room. Thank you for this great introduction into summary findings and grade and showing us sort of a snapshot preview of the Grade Pro software. And I as well look forward to the sessions coming up in February and March, and as well to Nancy, your methods group, and Holger Schoeneman's joined the line as well for the online modules that you're creating. I think that is absolutely superb. What I'm going to do right now is just send you through an evaluation form through the file transfer window, and what will happen is you will see a dialog box pop up prompting you to accept the file that I'm sending through. So please, I encourage you to fill that out. We do want your feedback if you have any ideas for future webinars or feedback about the interface. I will gladly receive that. And as well, Nancy mentioned that she is more than happy to provide a copy of her slides as well. What I suggest that you do is you contact us at ccnc-iph@mcmaster.ca and request the PDF of her slides, and we will be happy to send those to you. Thank you once again for everyone for joining us. I can't believe that we are in the last session of the fall series and that the new year is just around the corner. So I wish all of you well, and I look forward to seeing you again in January. Have a great day.